Hey guys, welcome to episode 1 of the Zhen Way Podcast. My name is Zhen Way. I will be the host of your podcast, obviously, because of the name. But first of all, a little bit about me, since this is episode 1. My name is Zhen Way. I am currently on a career break after spending 3 years in a mental health tech company. And prior to that, I actually spent quite a number of years in consulting and also in banking. But surprise, surprise, my bachelor's degree was actually in psychology, which is something I'm going to cover a little bit about, a little bit more during this episode, around how did I actually end up, being in the social sciences, ended up being in health tech in general, right? So that's what I'm going to be covering a little bit. But after spending more than 10 years, in my short career, I realized that there are actually some curiosity itch that I needed to scratch for myself, and podcast was a very interesting medium for me because I came across so many long form audio and obviously some video formats that were really, really fascinating because they are able to kind of go into quite a bit of depth, right? So this podcast generally is going to be covering things that I am interested in, for example, in organizational psychology, in culture and mental health, and tech as well, because I really is I self-proclaimed geek, right? So I dabble a lot into technology, really trying to understand what are the different usage and use cases as well. If you are like me, you probably are curious about quite a few things, right? So in general, today you might be interested about fitness, around how you can change your habit. Tomorrow you'll be wondering how to get that promotion. So same thing as me, right? That's really what the podcast is going to be. I'm just going to be covering what fascinates me. So besides covering the career aspects of how I ended up in a tech job, I'm also going to be talking a little bit about how I am going to be building this podcast moving forward. I wanted to experiment with the concept of building in the open. I find this fascinating because of some concepts that I've covered over the years, right, in my career, which is operational transparency, which is giving people insight into how you operate. And generally speaking, people would appreciate some level of transparency. Like for example, if you are ordering a pizza, for example, it used to be that you wonder where your pizza is, but today we take it for granted that exactly where your pizza is, right? Whether it's on the way, whether it's 5 minutes away, that is actually operational transparency. So I wanted to kind of give you an insight in terms of how I generally struggle to really just hit record today, and up until hopefully being able to kind of publish a few episodes down the road as well. In terms of scratching my own itch, I generally, when I pondered about starting a podcast, it's kind of like quite cliche because everybody seems to have their own podcast. I think my wife sent me a kind of like a meme talking about how starting a podcast today is kind of like in the 90s, like, hey, we should start a band, right? But I really was fascinated about podcasts as a channel or as a medium because it allows you to kind of get really into depth in various topics. I came across so many amazing episodes, which hopefully I'll be able to kind of share with you some point down the road as well. So when I started to even think about having a podcast was really, I think, my dabbling into really conducting talks, right? Being able to kind of cover various aspects throughout my career. And I find that being able to kind of share and what I have learned is the best way to learn myself as well, right? They do say that the best way to learn is to teach, and I find it to be very true. As I was growing up, I find that being able to kind of share my knowledge and being able to really just mentor the youth is really very rewarding as well. So I want to kind of be able to see whether this platform will be something that I'll be able to share some of my insights as well. So I think from there, I realized that let's try and kind of put myself out there and just try this whole creating content in general. So fast forward, thinking about it for, generally speaking, a few years before I hit record, I've spoke to my friend who started So This Is My Why podcast, Lingya, shout out to Lingya, who had a coffee with me, I think probably a year and a half, perhaps 2 years ago, and really just sharing her learning back then in terms of, how did she host her shows, and how did she actually invite, and never truly, afraid of no's, right? So I think she shared with me those insights, and I still didn't start. I remember that at that point of time, she said that, you just gotta get, 1 to 5 items down, right? And one of it was really getting a domain, getting your name started, and really just start researching what kind of style do you want. Is it one person? Is it a two person? I remember going down the rabbit hole for a while and really bought a domain and thought that my so-called niche was going to be something else, right? And after that, what happened really was work just took over, like just so many of us, right? Work and life just took over. I worked in a startup which is extremely challenging and consuming. It was a really small. We had a really small team, and therefore it didn't allow me to really just spend amount of time to do this, right? I contemplated a various amount of time to really just revive the project because hey, I bought a domain. You imagine really just it wasn't a lot of money, but I spent like some money to really just buy a domain and set up a name, right? I decided on a name and thought to myself, right, perhaps this would be keeping myself accountable. But I guess like many of us, we bought stuff to start a hobby and never really finish it, right? And I started to kind of have questions to myself, really, that do I want this enough? Because the common challenge towards inaction or procrastination is really that perhaps you just didn't want it enough, or the whole goal setting cliche where perhaps you didn't paint a very explicit picture of what you really want and what you envision and how exciting it would be. But for me at that point of time, I was just tired, like I was handling quite a bit of aspects of the company, ranging from operation, service delivery, product management, you name it, right, in a startup. So I was pretty consumed, coupled with really life events like moving house, getting married and things like that, right? So along the years, it was just a lot of I guess excuses and also really real reasons for not starting this. So fast forward until today, what actually kind of propelled me to start Record was really that I wanted to take a career break after 3 years being in a fast-paced kind of company. It was really exciting for me, being able to kind of develop my career in that aspect. But after settling down, there's a lot of moment of reflection. After working for 13 years, you tend to realize that it's good to really just slow down and reflect upon a lot of things, right? And I realized that perhaps this is the best time for me to be able to have that creativity outlet as much as taking rest. To really kind of just start something fun. I wanted this to be fun, so hopefully this will be fun. So I think that's what kind of like restarted the project. And the next thing I was revisiting the niche that I thought about a few years ago. A few years ago, I think the niche was really that, I'm fascinated about various things. I think curiosity is probably something that has been with me throughout my years, and that's kind of how I landed my job, right? Being a social science into tech, it's not a direct path, but curiosity has allowed me to do so. But the problem with being curious about many things is that it's kind of like contradictory to what is being preached out there about having a niche, right? I've came across saying around the richest is in the niches, for example. And until today, I still see a lot of, as I was doing the research for this podcast, I still realized that there are a lot of believers in this, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, because I do think that you perhaps in the sea of podcasts out there, it makes sense to have a niche. But it didn't really sit well with me in that sense, because I didn't really want to just focus on something so soon, but I felt trapped and I think it became my excuse to not hit record, right? Until I think it was 2 weeks ago that I really sat down as I have nothing better to do since I'm on a career break. I started going into like, what is my niche, right? It can't be that. Are there more people out there like me that are just curious about general things? Perhaps more inclined in certain areas, but in general we're quite broad, right? And I found that perhaps there is a different angle to this, right? So let me share with you a little bit about what I found as well, in terms of, in case you were you wanted to start your podcast on, or in fact any kind of content creating kind of project or career, whatever it may be, is that there are a number of people out there that says that don't worry about your niche first, or you are the niche, right? As cliche as it is, or perhaps it sounds idealistic to you. Yeah, of course, these big personalities, they can say that they are the niche. They tend to gain a following. But I tend to think that what they say makes sense, right? And let me tell you why, right? So there are a couple of people that I kind of researched into. So they were big personalities, of course. Gary Vee, right? So he started VaynerMedia, very prominent creator and business mind, right? So he always tends to say the right things in social media. I don't know him personally, of course, so I don't know whether does he walk the talk or not. But I tend to agree with a lot of things that he say around. He tend to dabble in a lot of different things, right? So I remember there was an interview that was having with a young kid that's just graduated from college, and saying that, hey, stop looking for your niche. You are the niche, because I would do things like filming around a garage sale or a junkyard sale, right? Everybody's been telling him he's crazy, but that got tons and tons of views because it's relatable, right? He's being authentic. He's trying to kind of share what he learned from it. So that kind of started the kind of like rabbit hole around, like, is this guy, does he know what he's talking about? Obviously he's very successful, but does it work for me, right? Then I went, I started scrolling down like through the I still remember it was basically just my YouTube feed, right? Just scrolling down, and wondered like, how do I find my niche, right? And then I stumbled upon Ali Abdaal, right? So for those of you who don't know him, he's viewed as a productivity guru. Used to be a medical student. I think a really fantastic, brilliant person. I watched a ton of his videos, and he was talking about niche as well. He said that, hey, don't worry about your niche as well. He said the same thing. Don't worry about niche. It will emerge itself, right? Just keep going, right? So don't worry about the first few episodes, or perhaps the first ton of episodes, I believe. And he didn't think that he was going to be this productivity guru guy person. Until much later on, he basically said that some audience will be able to kind of respond better to a certain point. But the point is, keep trying, and you'll be able to find your niche, right? So I think that is another point of view. But what really kind of, I guess, accelerated me towards action was really this guy called Dan Koe, Dankoe, right? You can look him up on on the different social media channels. He put up this video entitled "The Most Profitable Niche Is You." Again, very clickbaity. I thought, I didn't think too much about it, and I didn't quite know who he was as well, right? So it was just the algorithm doing his job. But what he said was really true. It resonated a lot with me because of how similar the thought process is. It basically validated some of the thinking that I have, right? So he was talking around, again, the niche is you, and why he does that was really that he wanted his whole content to reflect what he wants to gain in life. And that makes a lot of sense because it relates to another thought that I came across, was really that document, don't create, because that's the easiest way to start, right? And he was talking around how if you map out your life and you try different things to strive towards the ideal life that you want, then eventually you're gonna start learning more things, right? You're gonna start reading more, try more things, and all those things are gonna be some insights for those people who are just trying out, right? So never undervalue where you are in your starting point, because there's going to be someone that is probably going to be a step or two behind you in terms of their journey in life as well, or in their career. So never undermine that. That's number one. Number two is really that in terms of being able to dabble into just various interests that he has and just create a lot of different kind of content that really genuinely relates to himself, and that allows him to be able to create a content creating business eventually. Took years, obviously, to be able to really sell his kind of services, but he didn't quite have a niche. But it was really around him being able to create that personal brand, and it didn't matter what he was interested in. If he wants to talk about culture, he will talk about culture. If he wants to talk about philosophy, he will talk about philosophy. If he wants to talk about fitness, he will want to talk about fitness. And that kind of fits, what I want to be trying out as well, right? Because generally speaking, I'm interested in various areas, right? Namely organizational psychology, namely tech, mental health, career development, and leadership and culture as well, right? So culture in terms of, I guess, in an organizational context, politics as well, right? So hopefully I'll be able to cover some of it in terms of my fascination in these areas. So if you look at the kind of books that I read, it's quite broad as well. Generally non-fiction, I'm sorry. For those of you kind of expecting some fascinating fiction stories, right? I was really blessed with, friends giving me books like, for example, the Freakonomics book, right? I was also generally very, very fascinated with Malcolm Gladwell in terms of how he researched his stories as well, in terms of outliers, in terms of Blink, right? That book is fascinating because it talks about gut feel and split-second decisions, right? And I watched a lot of random videos, and one of it was really as part of my organization, Salim Ismail. He was the author of this book, Exponential Organizations, right? So he covered really cutting-edge stuff, right? Like, for example, one of the talks he was giving in my past career was really that he talked about how there were already experiments with sound waves being able to kind of boost your energy level, and how the future of energy drink competitors is not the energy drink producers themselves, but this kind of tech companies, right? And he talks about how different organizations ought to think about competitions, right? So as you can see, it's a broad-ranging stuff. Even the videos that I watch and the podcasts that I watch, that I listen to, are broad-ranging as well. It ranged from very popular tech YouTubers like tech enthusiasts, like for example NKBHD, very popular video journalists like Johnny Harris, for example, and podcast people, personalities and authors like Tim Ferriss, for example. They also kind of like allows me to consume and be curious about these broad-ranging topics, right? So hopefully I'll be able to cover some topics that you would like to listen to. So I'll be perhaps I'm asking you for just leaving, perhaps write into me, or perhaps leave a comment in wherever you get wherever you're consuming this, and I'll cover some of those topics that perhaps I find fascinating as well, and you find fascinating. If I find it fascinating, we'll cover it, right? That's the beauty of, I guess, naming the podcast the Zhen Way Podcast. Playing off my name, I can talk about literally anything. So let's try this out for a while and see where we go, right? So I guess that's really the I guess what the platform or the podcast is going to be about. So I'm going to cover a little bit about the technicalities of things, right? What am I using to record, for example? What is this? Why am I looking here? And things like that. So I wanted to really just make sure that I don't overcommit. So I'm recording through my phone right now, connecting to a USB mic. To this mic over here. This is a Tron Max mic. Bought it for work last time. Really good. I think the audio is it's pretty good. I've listened to the samples before, and the mic arm or whatever you call it is over here, but it just doesn't work for whatever setup I have here, right? So that's that. This is a box that it's lying around the house. That's kind of it. I mean, like everything else that you see here is not a virtual background. It's literally my study. so I designed my cover arts using everybody's favorite platform, which is Canva. Music's probably gonna be able to some open source music clip that you're gonna find. I'm gonna be hosting I'm trying out this hosting platform for podcasts using Podcastle. Using it for the first time, right? So we'll see how easy it is. I'll probably talk a little bit about Podcastle, how easy it is to use and things like that, right? So that's kind of really it in terms of the podcast, in terms of what this platform is really all about. So the next part of this podcast, I wanted to really talk about what's next and how is it related to my career as well, right? So I think the next few episodes, it's gonna be really talking about people who studied a particular degree, for example, in social sciences, for example, but didn't ended up in the field. I find this fascinating simply because I was just, as one would in a career break, to reflect upon what they did in the past, right? Really just to either to kind of pat themselves on the back or really just like, what the heck happened to my life, I guess. But for me, it's really, I find it not a typical path, right? So I wanted to really just had a moment to really just share a little bit more with you and find other people that perhaps are in my psychology background as well to share with you as well, because I remember that I have people in my network that, number one, psychology background, undergrad, became a software engineer, for example, became a management consultant, became a data analyst in a gaming company, for example, and some people who are doing data science work, for example, right? So these are the people that I found, and I think one more is in e-commerce, quite like training people to do e-commerce, right? So very broad-ranging kind of stuff, right? So I wanted to kind of take the next few episodes to cover some of that, and be able to really also building it open, experiment with interview types of format, right? Besides me talking to the camera alone. So that's gonna be the next few episode. But let's start talking. Let me share a little bit about my career journey, right? As the opener to the next few episodes as I invite guests to come on the show. So I mentioned to you that I started with a bachelor's of psychology and eventually went into banking for 2-3 years. And then I went into management consulting in a very predominantly digital consulting kind of firm for about 6 years. Then into mental health tech startup space for 3 years. So you can see that I went from social sciences to financial services to, I guess, professional services or tech, then into, full on into tech and, linking it back to mental health, right? Which is kind of like a sweet spot for me, quite an amazing journey. So let's talk a little bit about, what drove me to study psychology in the first place. So I remember that in high school, I came across quite a lot of stories that were told to me. For some reason, I'm trusted with a lot of stories and very, very blessed with a lot of stories. And I always wonder why people make the decisions that they made, even though from a, I guess, third person point of view, it caused them so much suffering and it caused them a lot of pain, or it just didn't make sense that it wasn't the most logical in my 16-year-old, 17-year-old mind. It wasn't the most logical and the smartest move, right? And I felt like perhaps I could help people as well, right? So that was the starting point of me starting to wonder whether psychology is something I should study, right? On top of that, the reality is really that being in an Asian family, there is always the stereotype of you needing to get a particular type of career, which is engineering, lawyer, doctor. I guess I wasn't good enough for all those things, and I thought that I didn't want to go into business and marketing as well. So perhaps what would be really fascinating so that I wouldn't get bored was really to go and study psychology, right? I am very blessed to have family that are extremely supportive, even though they were quite unsure about the outlook of the career for psychology, right? So we went to a few career fairs and came to realize at that point of time, Help University was back then it was Help University College was the I guess the number one program in the nation, according to who I can't remember. But truly, I had an amazing time at Help University, learning various subjects, everything that are typical. Like for example, abnormal psychology, to there are things that are not so typical. Like for example, like forensic psychology and also, forensic psychology, film psychology, and so on and so forth. Right. So those are extremely fascinating to me. I still remember the most memorable experiment that we ran, because as part of the coursework, you get to design experiments, psychology experiments to mess with people. Mildly, there's still an ethical board that you need to get past, right? So don't worry about that. So what we wanted to do in the confines of how we can mess with people's head was really that we decided to test whether your olfactory senses will affect your decision making, right? So what we did was that we packed the entire small little classroom. We bought an oven. We got an oven and famous Amos cookies and heat it up in the room so that it will smell like cookie the entire time. And if you pass the test, we will give you a cookie or a few cookies. Obviously, the control group gets nothing, and see whether it works, right? But I guess if you have studied experiments or how people do research and experiments, generally speaking, the results will be we can't find anything significant because the sample size is too small, yada yada, right? So we didn't find anything significant, but it was fun. It was really, really fun. So fast forward to I guess the final year, I guess I realized that I'm not going to study masters because I realized that counseling, clinical psychology, in order for you to serve the people in this field, it takes a toll on you. It takes, and that's why if you don't know, counselors and clinical psychologists, they all have their own counselors or clinical psychologists that are taking care of them. They should, because it's really taking on that emotional burden of people every single day as part of your job, right? And I realized later on as a psychology undergraduate that most of the time it's people's life. You don't prescribe decisions to them. You don't prescribe as much as possible advice to them because it is their life, right? And I find myself hard. I find it really difficult and challenging back then to not project onto people, right? So this was me, 19 years old, 20 years old, right? Finding myself hard to kind of preventing myself from projecting onto people. So that probably won't fly really well as a career, right? Even though I thought it is a very noble it is a very noble profession, but it's probably not going to be for me, right? Then I studied organizational psychology. Absolutely loved it because it was applying it in the organizational setting. I remember the coursework being quite fun as well because you get stuck with a bunch of people that was randomly assigned to your group, and you just gotta make it work, right? So I had a lot of fun working that. And realized that perhaps this is a way for me to be able to still apply my knowledge into the workplace and still get a head start in the professional career space, right? So then my entire objective of my studies was really to kind of rake up different kind of experiences, really, because I realized that I'm never going to be the valedictorian. So what I opted to do instead was to get as much practical skills as possible. Like, for example, organizing things, right? Project management, being able to kind of, work with a budget, work with deadlines, be able to kind of create something that is tangible, for example, running for student council and things like that. I thought that those experiences counted. and will be beneficial to me, and I opted to kind of overcompensate on that area. Graduated with not too shabby grades, I must say, second upper class, even though it's not first class. Those experiences really helped me, because what I have opted to do later on after I've graduated was really trying to kind of get ahead in my career. At that point of time, the mindset was very simple: to be able to get as high of a stepping stone that I could get, right? So I started applying for what was very hot back then. I don't know whether today is still a very hot kind of job, but I started applying to all sorts of management trainee programs, right? And I remember applying to one of my ex-companies as well, various banks, Maybanks, HSBC, Nestle, all these different kind of companies, right? Because they are known to be able to develop young talents, and and quite frankly, they pay really well as well. And I thought that I should give it a shot. The funny thing is, I ended up in Alliance Bank, one of the smallest local bank in Malaysia back then. We used to say we're the second smallest local bank when I was still there. I don't remember applying for them, frankly. Perhaps it was at a career fair or something that I dropped my resume. They called me up and said that, you know what, come for an interview, right? But it's going to be a group assessment, kind of like a center kind of thing, right? So they invited like perhaps hundreds of people, and perhaps like the apprentice or something, that you get shortlisted and then you get selected for the job. So we did a bunch of like assessments ranging from group activities to presentations and things like that. And I was one of the 27 or 23 to be selected out of the entire 100 over candidates, or more than 100 candidates, I believe, to enter the program. So I took on the job, and with no regrets as well, because honestly speaking, after listening to other graduate programs, by far it is still one of the best rotation programs out there, because I've heard of many management trainee programs out there that basically just puts you in one department and still call it a management trainee program, or they put you on rotation, but generally speaking, it's perhaps just one or two, right? Because they also need to balance between the business need and also the development aspect, because they can't have you keep rotating around, because that's going to be disruptive, and probably not the best for your own development as well from their perspective, right? But they opted to do the exact opposite. They sent me to all over the bank, and that allowed me to really, really understand how a bank functions, right? It allows me to, as an undergrad in psychology, understand how finance system works, ranging from the branch banking, right? Being at a branch for a couple of weeks, to business banking, to corporate banking, to the supporting functions as well, to operations, to IT, to probably not IT, I think to operations, to Islamic banking was fascinating, to audit, right? So I get to actually work on a small sample set of audit at a branch. How fascinating is that? Like for someone that has never, as a first job, it's interesting as heck, right? But let me tell you, from a business perspective, it is probably very expensive to run, I must say, because because of the amount of rotations that you need to go, you probably only stay at certain places for a couple of weeks, sometimes 2 weeks, the shortest. And as the recipient, like as the department, imagine, right? You're working in a full-time job and someone comes to you as a young management trainee for just 2 weeks. What the heck are you going to do with him, right? Or her? It's not easy running that program. But as a learner on that program, absolutely fantastic, man. So after the rotation, I got placed at the product team, right? So it was actually the mortgage team. I still remember. Basically, the product team that actually of the bank that designs different promotions, that design different structure to be able to kind of promote their version of the mortgage product, right? Which is housing loan essentially. So was there for a while. made a couple of mistakes over there. Wasn't patient, I must say. And then I decided that, you know what, perhaps this is not the most exciting department for me, right? I decided to really just, to reach out to see whether I could go into HR for a while to apply my psychology knowledge. How naive. Because, the what you learn in degree, it can still be applied, but not in the most direct sense. I'll get to that in a little bit, right? But really, I opted to kind of go into the HR department, and specifically the department that I got into was development and learning, right? So I was then put in charge straight away to manage the management training program that I graduated from. And then I immediately recognized the challenge around going to department, really trying to kind of help them to structure the program better, right? Trying to convince them that, hey, it's part of you getting new talent, and you need to, quote unquote, sell your department. You need to put your best feet forward, right? And getting the buy-in of all these different bosses as well. So it was really fun, right? But I had my fair share of challenges back then as well, and I remember questioning myself whether I'm in the right place. And this is one of the most profound, I guess, one of the first career-related leadership moment that I had was really bumping into the chief operating officer of Alliance Bank back then. His name is Raymond. He has a very strong heart for young talent development, which is why he is the sponsor for the program, which basically, he is overseeing the program to make sure it's running well. But HR is running it, right? He saw me at this usual bakery that everybody goes to. At that point of time, it was near Cap Square in KL, in downtown KL. I remember that I was sitting down there, really just having my own moment to just even having a cup of coffee and things like that. And he sat down and he said, "Are you all right?" I guess I looked like crap back then at that very moment, and I was nervous because, remember, this is my first job, right? I didn't want to get in trouble. At that point of time, I didn't want to sound like I'm ratting my bosses out in my own department as well. But I thought, you know what? I just want to learn from him. I just thought, like, you know what? Screw this. I'm just gonna say it. I say, like, I don't know whether I'm in the right place, right? I told him briefly a little bit about what happened. And then what I realized was he could have really just walked away and not say anything about it, right? And just give me a few words of inspiration or whatever it may be, and go on with his day. He is, after all, running the entire operations of a bank. But I remember that my boss then came to me and checked in with me and say, "Hi, hey, how are you?" and stuff like that. You don't have to worry about being in the wrong place and stuff like that. Those words came from the conversation that I had with him. Those words would not have came out of my previous boss's mouth if it's not for the conversation. So he spoke to my ex-boss. I know that really well. And I thought to myself, you know what? There are good leaders in this organization, and that's how you exemplify good leadership. Just by small moments like this, right? Just sitting down with someone, asking them how they are, and follow through with it. It probably took him like 10, 15 minutes around just basically just say, like, hey, someone under you just felt like he looked terrible perhaps, and maybe you should check in with him. Maybe that's all he did, right? But it meant so much to me, really. And I kept in touch with him. I reconnected with him much later on, and he still gave me time. So I must really thank him for that first leadership moment, right? So after that, I decided that it's time to move on and someone referred me into Accenture, which is where I spent the bulk of my career. And Accenture is for those of you who don't know, is a consulting company. It's publicly listed as well in the US. While during my time over there, I did a bunch of stuff ranging from HR related projects all the way to really just very tech based kind of projects as well. So I use the angle of being in HR, in learning and development, to then at the right time, at the right opportunity, I think there was a project that is related to an IT-based company, but they were looking into how do they develop their people as well. So they got me on, and the first project that I went to, I met really amazing leaders as well. And it's one of those career moments where I truly believe everything happens for a reason. Because frankly, my confidence was quite affected in the banking career, and immediately going into this career, this particular project, it picked me up really, and largely by the leaders that was there to really support me and guide me, right? So shout out to Adeline, Shelley, and Yiche for being amazing leaders and seniors to me, and the second career moment, leadership moment, was really that I remember Adeline, which is the project manager back then. She was so tough on the issue, but so gentle on the person. She defended the team in front of the client, and really genuinely showed me that you can be someone that people look up to, but at the same time you can build relationship with them, because that's how you can build great engagement and motivate people to move forward, right? And throughout that 6 years, I met even more amazing leaders, right? I can't name all of them. I don't want this to be dropping names where you don't recognize, but I must mention a few. Shout out Chun Hao as well to teach me so many different things around how to lead a team, and also how to actually execute really, really well along the years as well. Shout out to another Adeline that reminded me to stay in the moment, right? To not be overwhelmed and to be too hard on myself. That was extremely important, because that was one of the most challenging projects that I ever had. But throughout this career of mine in Accenture, what I realized that helped was being able to learn really fast, right? There is a Harvard Business Review article around consulting. For those of you who are very fascinated about consulting as a career, and don't quite know what it is, right? Because if you ask any of your consulting friends, they will find it very difficult to explain to you what it is. Trust me, until today, probably I still have some difficulty in explaining it without having the person to go to you like, huh? But generally speaking, you just gotta learn how to master a particular area enough, and to be able to project that learning and that subject matter expertise to your client to be able to solve a problem in different domains very, very quickly, right? So the Harvard Business Review article talk about learning agility and be able to take on that risk to fail at any moment that you might be called a fraud, right? It's not to say that all consultants are actually not subject matter experts. There obviously are so many of them who are bona fide experts in their field, but a lot of times where us, the value that we bring to the table as consultants is really being able to have that very sharp critical thinking skills and project and solving skills, problem solving skills and project management skills to the table. When the organization is preoccupied with a lot of the different priorities, there's just not enough firepower to be able to propel the organization to a certain direction that they choose, right? So what we bring to the table is really to be able to be that second brain or the third brain, if you will. But what that really means is that we constantly need to learn different aspects, right? So I guess throughout the years, being able to stay curious about various different areas, including tech, was very valuable because we do consult a lot in tech. One of the projects that I did was really that to be part of was really to be able to implement an analytics project, right? An analytics solution to our client, right? So it was a first-in-class thing in a lot of ways because they were actually trying to find out how do we actually then balance supply and demand in a particular industry, right? Which I can't say publicly, but it was really that they were having so many problems in a natural with this particular natural resource, and there's absolutely a lot of incentives to keep producing, but how do you then balance it out with the demand price, right? Because of the various contracts that were done along the supply chain. So being able to be fascinated and continue to be curious about how machine learning actually works, right? How do data scientists actually test their hypothesis becomes a very valuable curiosity or learning point that I have. So to be able to just understand various concepts just enough helped me in my career to be able to then articulate what we want to achieve to the client and be able to really just then go to their colleagues to be able to convince them. And this is the way forward, right? What part of the learning in the consulting career was really that the biggest challenge to transformation or any kind of big changes, which is transformation is a fancy word for big changes really, is the people, right? You got to find the path of least resistance and to be able to find allies and champions on your side. That's a big part of the work that we do, in the consulting career, and that's basically it, right? Being able to tell stories really well, right? Being able to make something that is visually compelling in the form of PowerPoint slides, and because that's why you keep hearing these things around, like consultants are nothing but people who can do pretty slides. But that's not true. That's just part of the story to captivate your attention out of your 8 hours workday, right? To pay attention to our slides for that 5 seconds, it means a lot because we've got your attention and now you got to listen to us, right? So being able to actually tell the story well is underrated, really, right? The PowerPoint slides is perhaps in certain cases, had a bad rep, right? But in the work that we do, I do find that there is still value to be able to tell a story, right? Yes, you can tell stories without slides, but being able to tell it to a big audience, sometimes having a visual aid is what it is. It's basically how you use it. So being able to appreciate how different concepts come together, right? So I think if you're just starting to want to go into consulting and you know nothing about tech, but you use a lot of tech, right? Perhaps start from there, right? How does a smartphone connect to the cloud, right? A lot of us take it for granted, right? iCloud, Dropbox, Google Drive. How does it work? How does database work? How does cloud storage work? How does streaming works, right? Those are the different basic concepts that you can, if you can get behind how a database works and how does an app actually work, right? Translate an interaction that you have with a piece of tech into something that you see on a screen, be it on a web page or an app and stuff like that. That's a good place to start, really, because what you will realize, even in a tech job, which I'll touch upon in a bit, is that you need to be able to understand how does all these things translate into the service or the app or the product that you are using. I think that's very important, regardless of which industry you're going to be in, because at the end of the day, I think we're just only going to get more digital if you haven't realized already, right? Everything from generative AI like ChatGPT or whatever not. So after doing 6 to 7 years of that, learning a lot from various leaders, I looked at other leaders in the organization and thought to myself, perhaps it's time for me to move on, because I wanted to answer a few questions for myself. Namely, can I build something, either by my own or to join someone, at the very beginning? That's number one. And number two, can I create a very interesting workplace for people to work, right? Great culture, great, people just want to show up to work. The third thing is really, can we do good and do well at the same time, right? These are probably the three main questions that I wanted to answer for myself. Honestly, I wasn't, actively looking, although I was curious about a few interviews here and there. And, a mutual friend of mine said that, hey, there's someone is starting a mental health startup. Would you be interested to kind of really take a look at it? And, they were looking for a C-suite level. I was thinking to myself, like, C-suite level, you gotta be kidding me. I only had about 10 years of working experience at that point of time, shy of 10 years at that point of time. I can't do this, right? What do I know? Then obviously my friend Douglas, he's been in the entrepreneurial space and at the social impact space for a long time, and he said, like, hey, you know what? You need to give yourself more credit. You literally advise us on so many different things. I think you can do it, right? Went for the interview, met the founder several times, and she'll probably like still joke about how she took a long time to convince me. But hey, I was taking a leap of faith as well. It was joining a really, really small startup and taking a big pay cut to join. It's a big investment cost. Opportunity cost, right? To join, right? Later on, I found out that I was up against some people who was very experienced. But perhaps because I was at a juncture where I'm still quite hands-on, and being at that level where I'm senior enough, I'm still quite hands-on, and being able to kind of contribute quite quickly, right? So I think that was probably one of the reasons why I've managed to kind of land the job as well, and largely also because of my background really in psychology and also in tech, right? The combination of both allowed me to actually jump into it. So dive in head first, right? So when I went in, we were launching our first corporate client quite immediately, and I needed to kind of figure out what is missing as well. And because we are only a few person team, literally a handful, there were quite a lot of things that were not there yet, right? We're just starting out. It's quite normal for that phase. I quickly realized that I was really just having flashback of all the different episodes of learning throughout the past 6 years of my career, right? Everything from translating user requirement to basically whatever you need from a user perspective into the tech-related stuff, getting working with the software engineers, work a website, right? All those years of playing with WordPress, Blogspot, those kind of stuff, suddenly had to resurface. Figure out why the heck did our email go into spam, figuring out how do you actually dissect stuff from the dashboard that we have, figuring out different aspects of analytics from the back end, right, that you normally don't see from a consumer app, right? Obviously, we were launching it to a corporate client, but at the end of the day, there's quite a number of end users as well. Translating those requirements, right? And that was heck of a ride, really, because for the very first time, I'm testing the actual mobile app, on our phone, and really just testing every single button and trying to find ways to break it. And it kind of did break in a few areas, as expected, because we were so lean and young back then. So managed to that was really fun. Having obviously supported by one of my colleagues, first few colleagues as well, which, I'm going to have her on a show as well to kind of share some of her experience as well. Shout out to Nubs. To be able to really just work those problems out, heck of exciting, right? Because in a big organization, you don't quite see the impact quite quickly. The impact radius is not as big as well because you're kind of like a drop in the ocean. Whereas in a startup, your impact radius is big. You can see the impact quite immediately. But I'm not gonna lie. In the past in the first 1 or 2 years in serving as a chief operating officer, there's a lot of imposter syndrome going in. People start congratulating me, wow, you're a C-suite now, and things like that. I used to start thinking to myself, it's a small company or whatever not. And I still remember, one of the conversations I had with the founder back then was really that I wanted to be comfortable in my own skin in this title. I want to be comfortable with it by the end of the year. Didn't quite get fully there, but I think by year two or year and a half, I think I was getting there, because I started to make a lot more decisions and started to work on bigger and bigger things as you expected from a startup perspective, right? So I'm ranging everything from building the first ever insurer partnership with AIA Malaysia, where they are offering it as a corporate insurance benefit, right? For the very first time, you are getting preventive mental health services as part of the corporate insurance plan. It's not been done in Asia before, and we still, until today, it is probably the proudest achievement that we have, right? That is probably the most exciting part, right? But to get there there's a lot of trial and errors. There's a lot of ups and downs. There are a lot of self-doubt moments, disagreements, a lot of really not sure whether you're doing the right thing for the first time, because this is my first startup. This is my first time as a C-level, making a lot of business decisions, big and small ones as well, right? But I guess the biggest learning from as part of jumping in from a kind of like a more conventional, if you call consulting conventional, was really that it was way more fast-paced than I thought it was. And it's so much more consuming than I thought it was. But I think people can see that I'm more fulfilled. People can see that I am more excited about my job. But of course, I think one of the learnings is really that I thought I was taking good care of myself by pacing myself, but eventually I needed to take a career break as well. So trying to kind of relearn this entire balance as well, right? It's not easy being working in a mental health company, but noticing that your own health is affected as well, and you needed to really just walk the talk as well. So that's not easy, but it took a long time to come to this conclusion. But back to that 3 questions, right? Have I answered them partially? Did I find more questions? Heck yeah. But I am convinced that you can do good and do well at the same time. I am convinced that you can actually create a place with good culture, good engagement level, just by doing the right thing and being able to really just walk the talk as leaders, right? So I think it reinforced a lot of learnings that I have in the past few years. I'm looking forward to share more of that as well, in terms of what are the I guess the funny stories and the challenging stories that I've learned over the years as well, right? So yeah, I think that's probably gonna be it for I guess my journey so far. I hope that's helpful in terms of how I kind of like make the jump. I guess to conclude around how did I ended up in a tech job, it's a combination of a couple of things, right? That first of all, I think is continuously being curious in different areas. I think being a generalist when you're not sure whether you're technical or not, if you're wondering whether you're technical or whether you have technical knowledge or not, you probably don't have. I might be wrong, but generally speaking, that's kind of how it is, right? If you wonder whether you have a technical skill, you probably don't. So the best way, in my opinion, is really to continue to try different things, right? To be a generalist and embrace that, right? At the end of the day, there will be one area that they talk about the T-shaped thing, right? Where you learn as broad as possible and then you go deep in one area. But if you're not able to go like a long T, like this long, right? Like this long, for those of you who are listening, then still having an inclination towards one area is a good place to start, right? Being able to realize that you have a broad base, there are certain areas that you are going to be you have a little bit more knowledge than the average person out there, will be good, right? But you don't really have to kind of kill yourself over really trying to kind of cover up your weaknesses or to be able to really just go really, really deep in one area, unless it is required of a job and you really want to go into that area, right? So generally speaking, I find that the more senior you become, or the further you climb in your career ladder, the less technical you have to be. So being able to be curious was how I kind of like ended up where I am, right? I'm in my mid 30s now. I think that if you ask anybody in terms of my career trajectory, they would tend to say that, hey, it's relatively okay and relatively fast as well. So that's kind of how I did that, right? And in terms of being able to land in a tech job to kind of like pivot, I tend to want to draw upon this lesson that was taught to me by one of our leaders in Accenture, which is Viming. He kind of like saying things like, building your skill sets or your learning is kind of like painting a picture using that dotted style, right? I can't remember what that art style is, but you're kind of like just painting a picture using just dots, like just dotting, trying to kind of paint a full picture with just dots, right? But the question is really, how do you then paint a picture without needing to go to the opposite corners of the picture, right? But really just painting adjacent dots to the current cluster of dots that you already have. I think by chance and also by design, I'm able to paint dots that are adjacent, right? So from me starting my first dot was basically in psychology, and then my general interest in tech pointed a few dots here and there, but didn't quite know how to connect it, right? And then because of psychology, I went into HR, right? That's another dot that I thought like perhaps I can do that. And then a tech-based kind of like consulting company, or majorly focused in tech. They do obviously non-tech stuff as well. But point being that they had a HR-based project that they could use my help, right? So I ended up there. So that's another adjacent dot. And then this opportunity came along in a digital mental health startup where it's tech, psychology, and also organizational services, right? So those dots kind of connected for me. So that's kind of how I ended up there. So being able to really just find adjacent dots or collect skills or exposures or volunteering is a good way to rack up those adjacent dots as well. Generally, it's quite a good way to do that as well. I think there's always a switching cost involved. So you have to be cognizant that there is going to be some cost that you need to pay, be it financially, opportunity, time, or resources. Those are there will be some switching costs that is going to be involved. Generally speaking, because of you transitioning. Obviously, if you find a place that is going to be investing in you, please take that opportunity. But generally speaking, I think that's going to be switching costs involved, right? Right. So that's kind of how I ended up in a tech job by studying psychology, right? So I think that's gonna be it for episode 1. Thank you so much for listening. If you're still here, thank you so much for listening to this first episode. And I'll see you in the next one.